We are committed to creating a safe and supportive space for our guests and listeners, and to provide information and tools that will help our listeners understand, manage, and overcome trauma. We understand that the healing journey can bring up challenging emotions. Therefore, we want to warn our audience that certain episodes may contain discussions or stories that could be triggering for some individuals. The content of the podcast is for educational and informative purposes only, and we encourage you to practice self-care and discretion while listening, and to reach out to a trusted support system or professional if you feel overwhelmed and need help on your healing journey. So welcome back to Healing and Growing Hand in Hand podcast. I'm your host, Lisa Tickle, and our guest today is Lynda Harlos. And I'll tell you a little bit about her, and then I'll give her the opportunity to share a little bit more. She is a sex trafficking and abuse prevention global educator. She is also a keynote speaker and an author. And her book is called Walk a Mile. And she'll talk a little bit about that as well. And the subject that we're going to talk about, and it's a challenging one, but it's a very, very important one, is domestic sex trafficking prevention. And some of the stuff we're going to kind of go over is what it is and what it's not, which is really important to define that. How to spot someone who is being groomed, and then what the term groomed is, because we like to dial in and make sure that we're all on the same page and understand what these terms mean. So that is our subjects for today. Thank you, Lynda, for joining us today, and welcome.
Thank you, Lisa. I appreciate you having me. It's a pleasure.
I appreciate you sharing this message, because this is a really tough one. This is a really, really tough one. So tell us about you and your story.
Our story. Well, my daughter got trafficked back in 2010 by her live-in boyfriend. But he started off just being a boyfriend to start off with. And that happened after she had been gang raped at a party and gotten pregnant. And unfortunately, a lot of her friends didn't believe her story anymore. So her social life kind of blew up. And he happened to notice her at school and noticed that she was kind of off by herself. So he reached out to her on social media to find out what was going on. You're so pretty. Why are you standing alone? And so she didn't, divulge a lot of information at the beginning, but eventually she did. He gained her trust to some degree, and she did tell him a little bit of his story. And then she ended up saying, he said to her, well, I believe that you were raped, and I believe that's how you got pregnant. And he had his in. That's all it took for him to suddenly become her hero, because at least somebody in her social life was believing her story. And when you have something traumatic happen to you and people don't believe you, it just causes this internal breakdown. And you become very susceptible and very vulnerable and an easy target. And that's what happened to her. So he took a little while to eventually become her boyfriend and convinced her to let him be part of the child's life. He was going to provide, a father figure. He was going to provide a place for them to live. That took him a little while to accomplish, but he eventually convinced her to move out. We weren't happy about that particular idea, but also we didn't want to hold our kids back. So anyway, because being a woman who was 18 with a baby, that's kind of young, and I still really wanted her to be at home with a family around her and supporting her, but he convinced her to move out. Within 3 to 4 months of moving out, he started trafficking her. So that's kind of the short story. It's a lot more detailed than that in my book, but that's the short story, so that this presentation doesn't go on for too long.
Yeah. And what you were just describing is how he kind of groomed her. I mean, you didn't go into great detail, but he was earning her trust. He was validating her. He was supporting her. He was making her feel like he was coming alongside her and believed her and supported her and was there for her and was going to help her. Right? All of that.
Yeah. Yep. So that part is actually what we call the luring part. So he was doing everything he could to become her hero. Now, the grooming part is where they're actually going to find out where your boundaries are. And then they will slowly start pushing those boundaries. And they do that by, so you say that you're okay with doing a photo, but you're not okay with a threesome. So then they're going to start holding back their love and affection They're going to start making it the victim feel like, oh, what do I do to get this love and affection back? And then he's going to suggest a threesome. And she's going to say, okay, just to get that love and
Mm-hmm.
attention back. And when she does, he's going to give all that love and attention back and reward her with all the things that she needed and wanted at the beginning. In my daughter's case, it was, protection and a father figure. And then he would talk about the house they were going to get. Um, and or they hand them cash. And then they do that again. And then they do that again. And then they do that again. And what they're doing, they're grooming the victim to understand that sex equals reward.
And love.
So that's what it is. And love and
Mm-hmm.
acceptance. And yes. So reward could be more than just
Mm-hmm.
money for the victim because they have been lured and they've been pampered and they've been given everything they wanted at the beginning stage of this relationship. They, whatever it is that they wanted at the beginning is what they'll continually give them after they do sexual favors for them, but they'll make it seem like the victim is the one that's at fault, that somehow they did something
Mm-hmm.
wrong, and that's why the love and attention was being taken away, and so then the victim feels like I need to do something to get this back, because by this point most victims feel like they really don't have anybody else in their life that cares about them, especially this
Right. They
much.
isolate him too. I mean, getting him, he was
Absolutely.
able to get her to move in with him, and then he was able to isolate her. And it's almost,
Yes.
it's kind of like a brainwashing. Like it's almost like they get desensitized because this happens over and over. And so that first time it's horrific, it's horrible. And by the time they've done it the 10th time, it's not as horrible and they've been desensitized to it.
Absolutely. That's exactly what happens. And the isolation piece is definitely a huge piece of that. The only reason my daughter was trafficked for only 3.5 months is because he wasn't 100% able to isolate her completely, because we always stayed in touch with her. I was always reaching out to her, texting her, come on over for coffee. And one day when she went home and she saw him standing over her son's playpen, she just thought to myself, why am I here? I don't have to be. And so she got him stinking drunk until he passed out. And she called me and she said, Mom, come pick me up. No questions asked. All right. So she didn't know she was trafficked. She didn't know what had happened to her. And traffickers are exceptionally good at making the victim feel like it's their fault, that they're the ones that said yes to this. They're the ones that consented to this. They're the ones that wanted this. And everything gets turned around back onto
Mm-hmm.
them. And so it took her a bit to realize that that's actually what happened. Like it took her almost 10 years to realize that what had actually happened to her was that she was trafficked, because she was still so stuck in that trauma
Mm-hmm.
bond that she had with him, and still so stuck in the fact of thinking that this was her fault, that she had said yes, that she didn't say anything for 10 years. She did eventually start volunteering at an organization here locally so that she needed some volunteer hours to try to become a police officer. And then at this organization, there was a police officer there that was sitting there talking to her. And just through the conversation, she ended up finding out what domestic sex trafficking is, because we all believe it's something different than what it really is, and what consent truly is. And that's when she realized she hadn't given consent. He had manipulated and coerced and threatened
Ah.
her into it. And so she realized she did not say yes. And she also then realized that actually what happened to her is that she was trafficked.
It's so insidious. It's so there's like a narcissistic component in that. And I've said this so many times that until you've been in one of those relationships, you have no idea. They're so insidious and they're manipulators, and they have a way of convincing you, just like what you were saying, where she was thinking it was her fault. They have this way of being able to twist it around and put it back on you, which is just then continuing the victimization. And it's
Yes,
amazing that
absolutely.
she had that in her to see that. I mean, oh. So she called you up and she got out.
Mhm.
So did she completely walk away from this relationship?
It took her a while because unfortunately this man is has partial custody of my grandson. So he was able to see him every other weekend. That created a bit of a hassle. She never took him to court on it because he threatened to use what she did uh, to discredit her parenting. And so she never took him to court about it. But after she found out that this was trafficking and she was talking to the police officer, that's when she kind of slowly was able to start making it so that her son didn't have to go with him anymore. And she basically then threw it back on him and said, I'm not taking you to court, but you're not getting to spend any time with him either. So it did take her a while to really break away from him
Mm-hmm.
completely. Um, and she definitely had that trauma bond. I mean, there was a couple of times she let her come over to her place when she had moved. So she lived with us for almost a year, and then she moved out, tried, to be on her own as a single mom, very, very hard. But she struggled a lot for a few years on that. So at one point she was on her own, and she actually did let him come and stay for a couple of weeks because she felt so bad for him.
Yeah.
And again, it's that trauma
Mm-hmm.
bond. And um, he tried again, and of course she was a little bit smarter and like, I'm not doing that. So that didn't work, and then she eventually kicked him out again. And of course, in the background, we're not knowing any of this.
Right.
We're aware that he was abusive. That's what we were thought, and the little bits of information she gave us, we just thought he was abusive. And neither one of my husband or I know anything about abuse either, because we didn't come from abusive relationships, either one of us. And we have a healthy marriage and have for a lot of years. And so we're looking at it from a distance and hearing what society says about abuse and going, okay, this must be abuse. Like, never in a million years thinking that it actually escalated to trafficking,
Mm-hmm.
because first of all, we didn't even know what that was. But so this is kind of what has happened to her. And yes, she did eventually break away from him, but it took her a long time for it to be like a 100%.
Yeah. Yeah. So you didn't know for the longest time that she was actually sex trafficked. You didn't know at all.
I didn't know until, nope, I didn't know until she found out, which was 10
Oh
years
my
later.
God. See, that is how insidious
Yeah.
it is. That is how, what is the
Yes.
word? Like it's so under the radar, you know?
Hmm.
And so that's why we need to bring awareness out. So why don't we start defining some of this? So you defined grooming and what that looks like. So what is
Hmm.
sex trafficking or domestic sex trafficking? Let's talk about that, because like you said, you had no idea. You thought she was being abused, and it was far worse than that.
Right. So domestic sex trafficking looks completely different than what we see in the movies. So the movie Taken talks about a girl who goes to another country with a friend. They basically get kidnapped, sold. Here a dad comes and saves the day and brings her back home. Or Sound of Freedom movie is a group of people going in and rescuing kids, that have been, kidnapped to another country, and then bring them back to their waiting families. And that is a form of trafficking. Absolutely. That is typically what we call international
Mm-hmm.
trafficking. So international trafficking is where there is movement needed. So they are literally taken from where they are originally from, and they're moved to somewhere else. So that is what we call international trafficking. Domestic sex trafficking means there's no movement. There's absolutely no movement needed whatsoever. My daughter was trafficked right in her own home with her live-in boyfriend, literally like 10, 11 blocks away from our house. She was occasionally picked up by a driver and driven to um, sometimes 250 miles away from where she resided. But a lot of her clients were locally right where she was. So that's what domestic sex trafficking is. And she wasn't kidnapped. She wasn't taken against her will. She wasn't handcuffed to a bed. And those are the things that we think in our
Mm-hmm.
mind when we think about somebody being trafficked. They're in a crate, or
It's
they're tied to a
violent.
bed, or they're you're right, and they don't have any choices. They can't get out. They're locked behind closed doors. And domestic sex trafficking isn't anything like that. They're locked behind the closed door of their
Right.
mind. They've been so coerced and so manipulated and so beaten up, as to who they are, what they are, and their value, that they just can't leave.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not a locked door, it's a locked
Mm-hmm.
mind that keeps them there. So domestic sex trafficking can happen to anybody, anywhere, anytime. And that's why this is a global issue. Even though we use domestic sex trafficking and it's a global issue, it's because there's no movement. So even in Europe or in Australia, or anywhere in North America, domestic sex trafficking is all the same. It's where somebody is being trafficked right within where they are generally located, and they're not transported somewhere else. And that could be done by a family member. I know a girl who was trafficked by her sister. And in this case, she just trafficked her sister to get money for drugs. So it doesn't have to be an insidious, organized crime kind of trafficking. Sometimes it can just be somebody misusing another human being so badly. And then, you look up to your sister, so you do it because you want her approval, or it can be, a mentor that you have, and they've spent a little bit of time developing a relationship with you, and you trust this person, and then they slowly
Mm-hmm.
start switching this over to sexual, and then they'll traffic you. And sometimes the parents have no idea. Um, and then it can be, but in most cases, what we call the Romeo pimps, I believe it's 38.8% of all trafficking happens by an intimate partner. So
38.8%, you said?
yeah, by an intimate partner. 27% is by family.
27?
So yes. So we have a huge problem that we're not addressing. This is not a total stranger coming along and using and abusing our kids. This is somebody that the child or the victim usually knows. Very rarely do they not know. And even in my daughter's case, I mean, she did not actually start connecting with him until she saw him on the school ground, and she saw him hanging around some of the other people that she knew. So she did not, in any way, shape, or form, think this guy would be unsafe.
Right.
And when they did go for coffee for their very first coffee, he was with a couple other friends. This was not, my husband was waiting in the parking lot for her because this was a stranger to us. So we were waiting in the parking lot. She'd come home and she's telling me, yeah, he was there with his friends and we're hanging out. And so this is not somebody initially that you would sit there and go, okay, there's warning signs to this.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's like you would have no idea, and it's so sneaky. It's so sneaky. You guys did everything you could possibly do to protect her, and yet it still happened.
Yeah, and it still happened because we didn't know what it
Right.
was, and we didn't know how vulnerable Samantha was. We didn't realize that her social life had fallen apart. She did not tell us that for years. And we did not teach her proper consent. Those are the three things we missed. And I do a whole workshop on that every month for free for that
Mm.
reason, because I don't want anybody else to have to put their head on the pillow at night with naivety being the reason that their daughter or somebody they know gets trafficked. So those are the three things that you absolutely have to be aware of when it comes to anybody, because it could be a coworker who's getting
Oh
trafficked.
my God.
It could be your sister who's getting trafficked. It could be your children. Um, it could be anybody, literally anybody. I know of a 50-year-old woman come up to me in one of my presentations, and she told me that they almost succeeded. She was 50 years old, and they almost succeeded. And she told me the story, and I was flabbergasted, like absolutely flabbergasted, that same kind of system, same kind of way of working it, but they did it through a work relationship kind of thing, and slowly convinced her that she was beautiful, when she was in her midlife crisis, feeling maybe not unloved or not sexy anymore. And we all get stages in our lives where we feel very insecure or maybe unloved, and regardless of other things in our lives that are healthy. So there's always a window of opportunity if the traffickers are looking for it, and they're always looking
Mm-hmm.
for it.
Yeah, the story you were saying about your daughter sitting on the playground or wherever she was sitting, not that's the playground, she's older than that, but where she was not feeling good and he saw her, and they watch that, they look for that. And I remember in one,
Absolutely.
I was on a board of a nonprofit, and we were talking to a nonprofit that helps with getting women out of the sex trafficking industry. And the story she told, I mean, it took everything in me not to get up and just scream. It was so horrific. And she said that, she said, it's not like girls are walking down the street and these guys are pulling up and grabbing them and taking them. They've learned the technique of finding that one. And he said a lot of times they'll go to like the shopping malls, and they'll see the group of young ladies, and they'll look for that one that has her head down, who is not quite with the whole group, that looks a little separated, and that's the one that they target. And it just took everything in me, not to jump out of the seat, because that just horrified me, because that is so. I mean, that's not hard to find.
Not at all. Or the one who doesn't have any shopping bags and everybody else does.
Oof, God. See, I wouldn't even think to look for that. It's oh my God. It's
Yeah.
just horrible. It's horrible.
Because instantly the trafficker knows that this child probably feels like they are missing out on something because they don't have the money to get the things that everybody else is walking out with. Or the child who doesn't have the newest iPhone,
Mm-hmm.
or the child who's walking home alone from school, not because they're going to kidnap them, because they're not going to kidnap them
They're
right
not going to make
there.
a big scene.
They're going to
I said they're
Pardon me?
not going to make a big scene. They're not going to do something that's going to
Oh,
attract
absolutely
attention,
not.
right?
Right. Absolutely.
And what was the other thing I was going to say? I just it's just so insidious. I just I can't. I have a really hard time with this one. I was actually going to volunteer with some nonprofits on sex trafficking, but I hear the stories. When I hear the detailed stories, I can't hear the stories. So I'm just donating money. That's what I can do because I can't hear these stories. They're just so horrific. Oh, that's what I was thinking of. I also heard that this was several years ago, but that they also make more money sex trafficking the girls than they do selling drugs. And it's also
Oh,
safer for them.
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So first of all, it's a reusable product, right? So you look at this in a consumer point of
Right.
view. You don't have to constantly go out there and try to find new drugs to keep reselling. This is a reusable product. That's number one. Number two, you get stopped by a police officer with a girl in your car and it's your girlfriend. It's so easy to get
Yeah.
away with. So and number three, manipulating a brain that is not fully developed yet. So manipulating anybody under the age of 25 is actually pretty easy
Yeah.
to do. I know the Soviet Union or any communist country will say, give me a child who their brain isn't developed yet and I can make them a communist. So if we know, unfortunately, that the brain is that susceptible to being brainwashed, manipulated, our impulse control is not fully developed yet, so we'll do things that we shouldn't do, then it's very easy for anybody under the age of 25 to become a victim just for that
Right.
reason alone, for no other reason. And I've asked my daughter several times because, we had problems with her as a teenager, like most teenagers, lying or stealing or trying to get away with things. And I've asked her since all of this happened. And I said, so why did you do those things? She goes, I don't know, Mom. I wanted to. And I mean, I know there was going to be a consequence, but at the moment I didn't care. And that absolutely right there explains the lack of the brain development. Right. And we seem to think because they're 18 or 20 years old that they're old enough now. And they're not. My youngest daughter during COVID, she was 22, 23. And she had started meeting some guys online because, that was the only way you could really do it. Then the restrictions lifted a little bit, and so that you could meet out in public places. And so she was going to go, and she was going to go, and they were going to go to the falls. And I went, well, whose car are you taking? Well, I'm taking his. I went, oh, no, you're not. And she went, well, sure I am, Mom. This is the only way we can do it. I said, no, sweetie, this is not the only way you can do it. First of all, you're going to have some time with him in a coffee shop or somewhere public. You're going to have your buddy, whoever that is, and they're going to be within walking distance of where you are so that they can come and be there at a moment's rescue. Then they're going to call you in your 2-hour window to make sure, do you need an excuse to leave? And you're going to do this for a while before you ever get into the car with this guy. You do understand the falls is really close to the USA. And in that particular case, I was more concerned about the international trafficking because that also still happens. But I said, you're not getting in that car. And she just sat there, and for a second, she was really mad at me. Well, come on, Mama. And then it clicked in. But for a little bit, first of all, she was ready and willing to do this after already knowing about her sister's story. Secondly, then she was getting mad at me because, Mom, I'm an adult. I can do this. And then suddenly it clicked in when she realized, oh my goodness, I may be an adult, but I didn't think this through. And that's proof that the brain is not developed.
The truth is one day they're 17 and the next day they're 18, but nothing else has changed, just their age. It doesn't mean that they turned 18 and all of a sudden they have the wisdom of us adults, right? It comes with experience and time. Well,
yes.
You brought
and a lot of hard knocks.
You brought up some really good points though for your daughter about, and maybe you can share some more about the safety features. I was sitting there thinking, God, you had some really good points of of having a friend close by that she can call in a whim and they can be there in a heartbeat, having somebody call her or that friend call her in 2 hours, make sure she's doing okay. Because back when, I mean, I was married for a long time. And then when I got in the dating world, I mean, I had been out of the dating world for like 30 years. So it was very different, of course. It's very different going in as an adult. And there were so many things that were different, and it was online. And I had certain rules for myself, but those are some really good ones. And so what other things, I mean, what things can parents look for? What kind of potential victim look for? What are some of the signs? Because again, these guys are so sneaky. It's got that narcissistic component to it. So they're manipulators. They're master manipulators. And so we have to remember that. And those of us that aren't manipulators can get caught up in that, right? So what are the things that we can look for?
Okay, well, there's a ton of red signs, and honestly, we don't have enough time to
Yeah.
go through them all today. I do talk about them in my workshop, but typically, what's going to happen to somebody who's in an abusive or then possibly going into a traffic situation is one of the main signs is you're going to see them overly excited about this person at the beginning because they're being given everything they could think they need or want. And they're going to think that, they've hit the jackpot. Like, this is the best person ever. And those of us that are adults understand that term. It's too good to be true. Children, young adults don't. They think we're crazy. No, I'm just special, mom. And this person thinks I'm amazing. And you know what? Occasionally that can happen, but that's so rare. And if somebody is rushing the relationship along, so there's another red flag. If it's just going way too fast, and seems to be almost out of the blue, if they seem to have a whole new group of friends, typically that are this person's friends, and so they're basically kind of leaving their old friends and heading off with the new friends. It's one of the ways that they're isolating. And in Samantha's case, the guy who trafficked her had a group of friends that were doing the same thing. So it looks like it's safe because there's a bunch of people there. Then there's other one, they suddenly will get aggressive with you. So if you're the caretaker of somebody or a friend of somebody, and they might start saying things to you like, well, you don't trust me, or you think I'm stupid, and they've never done those kind of things before. That's the manipulator in the background telling them, doing what they can to break off those healthy relationships. So those are your key ones that are going to start off with. But then as far as when they're trafficked or right on the verge of being trafficked, their ID is going to be missing, because traffickers are going to do whatever they can to keep them so that they cannot flee and that they cannot get medical care without their help. They may get a new tattoo that they don't have any explanation for, and that's a branding thing that a trafficker does. And they do that for two reasons. Number one, they do that so that the victim feels like their property. It makes them lose their own individual identity. And they do that also so that the traffickers know this girl is taken. And
they
then
mark their territory.
Yes, absolutely. Like a dog on a fire hydrant. Yes. You might also start to see a lot of hotel pens or notepads or hotel keys in their possession because they've been out. And I mean, I have a lot of those, but that's because I travel.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Our kids shouldn't have those. No, if the way that they suddenly have changed their style of hair or the way they're dressing, or their nails are being taken care of, their hair is getting done, all of those things that's when they're being groomed, and they're making sure that they're ready, like they're getting them ready for this. But the girl thinks, oh, I'm just being pampered. So especially if all of that's happening like within a very short period of time. But then, I mean, there's so many other things that could be going on. Red flags are, and here's what you do need to understand is that if your gut is telling you something's not right,
listen,
I can pretty much promise you something's not right. It may not be trafficking. And I don't think I ever want to put anybody in a panic mode and automatically jump to the fact they're being trafficked. But even if the person they're hanging around with is narcissistic or abusive or any of those other things, that's not a situation you want your child to be in. You want to be starting to have those conversations with them where they understand that they can come and talk to you about this. So the number one thing that we try to educate everybody on, and it's the one thing I missed. I mean, we have a really close-knit family and we're very close, but I'm going to explain to you the part in this that I did miss as I go along. We have to be our kids' safe place. That means our kids have to be able to come to us and tell us anything, anytime, anywhere without judgment or criticism. Now, I did that first part really easily, but quite often I came in with judgment and criticism, hands on hip, with that little attitude and go, now, why did you do, right? If they're coming to you telling you something that's happened, they already know what they did wrong. You do not need to be standing on this moral pedestal, looking down at them and telling them they did something wrong. And they probably know it was their fault. If they've grown up with you, they know your moral code. You've already instilled in them what you think is right or wrong. They're not coming to you for that. They're coming to you for help. So put all of that aside. It is not important right now. And you will literally push them away if they feel judgment in any way, shape, or form, or they feel they're criticized. A trafficker will not make them feel judged for anything they do wrong. In fact, they'll tell them that was a great thing that you did.
Yes.
They want to encourage the bad behavior.
They'll create,
So
I would think that they would create a safe space for the person then, right? Especially if mom and dad is acting like that. Oh, well, you're safe here, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we have to be that safe place. And then additionally, we also have to do what we can to make sure that our kids have one or two more adults in their life that are safe.
Okay.
That are safe.
Yeah.
So what I suggest is that parents write down a list of people that they trust and get the child to write down a list of people that they trust. And then together, hopefully on that list, there'll be at least one more person that you both feel comfortable with for this child to go and talk to about anything without criticizing or judgment, and without you then saying to the child or making them feel bad that they didn't come to you.
Yeah.
Because what our kids need, I mean, there's some things that, you just simply don't want to talk to your mom about for whatever reason. And hopefully you get to the point where they will trust you or will believe that you aren't going to criticize them or judge them, or they just don't want to disappoint you sometimes, right? And they're constantly looking for our approval and for us to be proud of them. And so it's difficult for them sometimes to come and tell us something when they've totally screwed up. So it's the most important thing is not that they're not coming to us, but that they're going to somebody who is truly safe, to have a safe place. So we need to encourage them to do that without making them feel like we're not the safe place, right? So in that conversation, while you're doing this, you go, you know what? I always hope it's me that you come to first. But if for any reason you cannot, we're gonna find you another person that you really feel comfortable with, that I can honestly still say myself as well, I do trust this person. And the pact will be that you can go and tell them anything, and unless you're harming yourself, physically harming yourself or harming somebody else, because legally at that point we have to, do something to help both you and the other person. Whatever can be kept in confidence that you want to be kept in confidence. And so that's, a trafficker knows this. A trafficker is well aware, an abuser knows this, that all a person is looking for is acceptance, love, a place to go and talk to, a place where they can be themselves, kick their shoes off, and nobody's going to judge them. Eventually, they turn around and they're the biggest judges of all. But by this time, it's too late for the victim. They don't even realize that. They don't even realize this until they've left that relationship, of how manipulated everything was and how they felt like everything was their fault. And yet that was typically what encouraged them to go to the trafficker in the first place, is because they felt like they could just be themselves and they weren't judged. And so we have to be really careful as parents that we do not ever close that door on them, and that no matter what they do, I mean, there's some things my kids have done that, I just roll my eyes and go, and it's not anything that, whether it be drugs or drinking or guys or sex or anything like that, that I've given a moral code to, and I'm rolling my eyes thinking, oh man, you should have known better. My door is never closed to them, and they know it. And so one of the biggest things that I'm constantly teaching people on is you have to tell your kids that you love them, but it can't stop there. You have to say, I love you no matter what.
Unconditional love.
That's what they do. Unconditional love. And saying unconditional love is not something usually kids can really wrap their head around. They don't know what that means. But when you say, I love you no matter what, you can't do anything on this planet where I will stop loving you. You just can't. You just can't. And I've had my kids go through like a barrage of things. Like, so if I did this, would you still love me? Oh, yes, I'd love you. You know, if I did this, and what if I killed somebody? You know what? I'd be at the jail visiting you all the time because I will still love you. Like, I will still love you. What you do is right or wrong, and those are choices you're making in life. But I will always love
You can
you.
separate the
If
who
that's
from the
not
do, I say. You separate the who from the do. And that's a
absolutely,
great example as a kid. We need to love them unconditionally. We don't love everything that they do, but that doesn't change our love for
nope,
them.
absolutely, never
No,
will.
no,
Yeah, never
no.
will.
Oh, I got so caught up in that. I was, the question I had. So what about the kids who don't have parents who really care, right? Because that is true. And, what can a kid do? I mean, how would they find a, an adult that could help them?
That, you know what, and honestly, the victims that I mean, the people who are the most vulnerable are the easiest victims. They're the ones that traffickers will go to very quickly. So if they're homeless or they're drug addicts or they're immigrants or those kind of things, they have what we call high
Hmm.
vulnerabilities, and they are the easiest targets. And I mean, it's just easy. They don't have to worry about separating them from healthy relationships because they really don't have any, or it's easy just to offer them the next fix. And so then, they become dependent on the trafficker in order for them to get high. So we see that that's obviously one of the most people who are trafficked. But for a child and typically we see this a lot. You'll see a child who comes from a neglected home and they're brilliant, like
Yeah.
they're very smart and they're taking care of themselves and they're doing everything in their power to come away from that home life that seems to be trying to destroy them and become a better person in spite of that. And typically, those are the people that end up being world leaders because they've just overcome so
Right.
much. But the only advice I can really give is that when we see children in our lives, even if they're not our own kids, it doesn't matter. Even if they're not our own family members, it doesn't matter. We see a child in somebody's life and we see that they're isolated. We see that they're ostracized for some reason or made fun of or being bullied or any of those things. And I talk about this in the workshop too, about what professionals or other adults can do in children's lives. And it's be there for them and do it in a healthy way. Don't do it so that you're ever alone with the
Hmm.
child. Don't ever put them in a compromising situation, and teach them and tell them what you're doing. So, you know what, how can I help you? Let's go talk. And they try to pull away and go into a room alone. Go, no, 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 no. You know what? Your safety is more important. We're going to go somewhere where people can see us. And you're educating this
Hmm.
child all along. Everything that you're doing for them to help them have a safe
Yes,
person, you're telling them what you're doing and why. And now you're teaching them what a healthy relationship is supposed to look like because they don't have an example of
exactly.
one. You, or you can invite them to participate in some area where there are healthy relationships. And in just small ways, point out how that relationship is healthy. And just, I mean, the big red flags, most people know what the big red flags are, but the little red flags, you just say, you know what, if somebody ever does that or says that or, suggests that, no, you don't have to. You see this little hula hoop on the floor, a step in it. Anybody who's in that little hula hoop should be there because you've permitted them to be
Yes.
there. Nobody else should be in that hula hoop unless you want them in that hula hoop. And you have a right to do that. You may not have a right to say no to police or to teachers or whatever about things that you do or things that you say, but you do always have a right to say who is in your hula hoop.
Hmm.
And you have a right to use your voice and say no. So these are all just little things that we teach our kids as they're growing up, but these kids who come from dysfunctional families are never taught this. And we have to remember that just by saying little things like that and giving them an example of what consent
Hmm.
is, uh, might blow their world apart, and it might be the thing that saves them. You just never know. So just keep talking, just keep being there, just keep trying to um, help them in any little way that you possibly can. And then the last thing that you could possibly do for them is try to get them involved in organizations where they are
Hmm.
safe and where it involves things that they enjoy doing, like swimming, or and that might mean a little bit of money out of your pocket where you have to pay for swimming lessons or you have to pay for them to go, whatever. Just think you might be saving that one child's life, and that's what it boils down to at the end.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's so true. And yeah, this is a tough subject. And you've given such great tips, that I wish I had known. And I'm glad I know. And I'm glad we're getting this out there. And I know you have got so much more resources on your website, and you're going to share that here shortly. And then tell us a little bit about the workshop, because you keep bringing it up, and it sounds awesome.
Thank you. Well, I've been doing it for 4 years now. So at some point, some days I look at it and go, "Man, this is boring." But it's boring because I
Because you
do
know
it
it so
so
well.
often. But I know it so well, and I'm constantly changing the stats in there, and I'm constantly changing pictures, and I'm constantly trying to make it so that's a little more interesting for me and everybody else. But it's a free workshop I give every month, and I do it different days, different times on purpose so that different people can come and see it whenever they want to. It originally started because I was hoping to reach the parents who were from low economic families, because their kids are the
Mm-hmm.
ones that are most susceptible to probably, and just trying to give lots of just everyday little tips and hints. A lot of what I said today is on that workshop, and it goes through the three things that we missed, and hoping that people will learn from our mistakes, because that's we've decided to turn our pain into purpose. And the only way I can do that is by being an open book and telling people, this is how I screwed up. This is what I missed. And please don't make the same mistakes. So the workshop is about an hour and a half. You can come and go through the Zoom meeting anytime you want. So, and I even offer people to come back again with their kids if they want to, because sometimes it's just a way of opening that conversation. That might be a difficult way for you to open that
Right.
conversation. So if they come in and they sit during that vulnerability section, or they sit through the consent section, or whatever the case, because the presentation is typically the same every month. So if you've come and seen it once, you're going to kind of know when to come in. And it's just a great way to start bringing up that conversation with your family, with your kids, with your friends, suggesting other family and friend members come in and listen to the workshop. And then on my website after that, all the resources are people that I've vetted, or organizations that I've vetted, or books that I have vetted, that are just ways for people to continue that education. Because my job is really just to pull people's heads out of the sand and say, hey, just so that you know, this can happen literally to anybody in the world. It doesn't matter what race, what religion, what economic, what politics, it doesn't matter. They literally are looking and searching for anybody who has any kind of vulnerabilities. And so that's my job, is just to make people aware of that. And even though I do that hour and a half presentation and there's a lot of teaching in that, I really want people to go and continue that education, mostly online. And that is one of the things I'm constantly looking for my website, is courses and websites that are jam packed full of things for parents to educate themselves online, because it changes monthly. Like
Yeah.
literally the dangers out there change monthly. And that's not something that I can keep up on. And that's not my lane. It's not what I do. But I'm constantly making sure that those resources are on my website for people. So, as well as free apps. I just found a new one called I'm Safe, which is an excellent app. Designed by a guy from Australia who is originally from India, but it is, and he's on purpose making it free, because he just wants to do his part, to make this a better world. And it's an amazing app that allows people to have friends that they're connected with, and let them know, okay, I think I'm in trouble. And meanwhile, it's taking pictures for them so that if it needs to go to court, it can. It's stored in a cloud that's encrypted so much that it can only be gotten, with a court order. But it just gives, and I mean, it comes with so many features. And I've checked out a few other apps, and a lot of them are good, but this one's excellent. So my website, I'm constantly looking for things for my website. So when people are done my workshop, they're not left stranded
Mm-hmm.
going, okay, now what? Right? If they think somebody is being trafficked, there's organizations out there that can help. If they just want to learn more, they want to educate themselves more about online, or read a book, or any of those things, I have a ton of resources on there for that. So that's my life mission. And I do go around and I do speaking engagements anywhere, anytime anybody will let me come and talk. I'll talk to anybody. Um, so we're doing what we can just to get that message
Mm-hmm.
out there, because like I stated earlier, Tina, Lisa, I just want to make sure that nobody else puts their head on the pillow, with naivety being the reason something
And
happens.
we're just learning
That
about
that
all this. I mean, I'm learning more in this conversation than I have ever about sex trafficking. There are so many things that I learned that I had no idea. So we do need to get it
well,
out.
I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad to hear that in a way, because that means, what I'm offering is valuable, but that really also makes me sad in a way, because that means I got a lot more work to
I
do.
know, right? I know. It'd be nice if we went out of business, right? If we didn't have to do this,
I would be ecstatic if I went out
I
of
would be
business. But
thrilled.
instead, what I'm hearing 99% of the time, because as far as I know right now, I'm the only parent who is talking about this. And I have a right to talk about this because my daughter lets me. She's given me
Hmm.
permission to do this. A lot of other parents, even if they wanted to, can't because their child doesn't want them to. And I get that. I mean, it is an invasion into our
Yeah.
privacy for sure. Um, so I think I'm the only one out there that's teaching this from a parent point of view. And I'm constantly being told we need more of this. And yeah, we do. We
Well,
absolutely
there's
do.
lack of information. There's also misinformation. So you've
Absolutely.
got those two things going
Yep.
against you. And like you were saying earlier, things change so quickly that it's a little challenging to stay on top of it. But the information that you gave us gives us certainly enough information to start with, and certainly things to look for that parents probably never would even think of. So these are
Mhm.
hugely helpful. So give us tell the audience how they can reach out to you and what your website is so they can get these great resources and about your workshop as well.
Okay. Well, my website is Parent with Purpose. I think you can see it in my name down there. So it's parentwithpurpose.ca because I am Canadian. My workshops, if you go to the very homepage on my website, there's a button in there for you to click that will take you right through to the registration. And when you get to the registration page on Zoom, you have the option to pull down the dates and pick which date you want to come, date and time that works best for you. And right now I have them scheduled up until the end of the year. And then come October, I'll be doing the whole next year. I have a YouTube channel. It's also called Parent with Purpose. I'm on LinkedIn. That's where I'm probably on the most as far as social media goes. And you can look under my name, Lynda Harlos with a Y, or you can look under Parent with Purpose. I have a page on there on Parent with Purpose as well. My book you can find on Amazon. And you can, I think on my website, there's a tab on there about my book. So you can click on that if you want an easy access to get to that. And that book is really, I mean, I've written a couple other parenting books, but this book is my favorite book because it's a true crime story, and it's the story of me parenting my daughter and her coming home and telling us this, and like everything we went through for those years, and it will show you some of the red signs I missed, red flags. Some people call them signs, some people call them flags that I missed, and you'll the number one thing that people tell me after they've read the book is I actually could feel myself standing in the
Yeah.
room with you dealing with your daughter. And that was my hope. I really wanted people to understand. And we come from a really close knit family. Like we're community based, we're faith based. We spent movie nights together, game nights together. I was fortunate enough, my husband has a decent enough job. I could be a stay at home mom. So I had lots of one on one time with my kids. And this still happened to us. So I'm hoping, but it is because we definitely didn't know
Yeah.
about it. We definitely didn't know her vulnerabilities, and we definitely didn't teach proper consent. And so it's easy to fix this if people are ready, willing to educate
Hmm.
themselves.
Yeah. And we're going to educate. That's what this is all about, is absolutely getting that word out there so that we have less victims, right? So
Less
what would you
victims.
like to leave our listeners with?
I always like to leave it on a positive note. And so I'd like everybody to know that my daughter is doing amazing. My grandson is now 15 years old. He knows a big part of the story, age appropriate. He knows it. He loves his mother to pieces and is her biggest champion and defender.
Oh,
And hoping one day she can become a police officer. That's her end. That's her end goal. And we are all on the other side of this. We're all okay. We don't talk about it during family dinners. We don't talk about it. We just basically don't talk about
mm-hmm.
it. We did talk about it. It's done. It's finished, and we're moving on. And my daughter is one of the most healthiest people I've ever met, mentally, emotionally. She went through quite a journey, those 10 years all on her own, and learned how to figure out how to even just cope with life. But she's taught me so much. And out of all the people in my life, she is my hero.
Oh, I love that. Well, thank you so much. And, I'm going to say to the audience that I really am asking that you guys share this video or share this podcast, because every single person needs to hear this. We just don't know enough about this. And we need to get the word out there and save these kids, adults too.
Yep.
I mean, it's not just kids.
Amen. No, yeah, it is.
I
Yeah.
mean, you told me a
And
50-year-old almost got trafficked.
and I do know of people who are in their 30s and 40s who were trafficked. But personally speaking, this woman came up to me. So yeah, any age, any race,
No
any
boundaries.
religion, doesn't matter. No
No
boundaries.
boundaries. Mm. And it can happen to men as well, right?
It
Mm-hmm.
does. 7% is what is reported. And typically they identify as LBGTQ, that whole
Yes.
one, that LGBTQ. And the reason for that, we know that there's a lot more that are being trafficked or abused that are not coming
Mm-hmm.
forward. And that's because their masculinity is going to be
Yeah.
questioned or their sexuality is going to be questioned. And so they don't come
Mm-hmm.
forward. But any statistics we give, no matter whether it's this or any other ones, it's only of reported cases, and we know there's millions of cases that aren't even reported.
Exactly.
My daughter's case is not reported because when she was talking to this police officer, he basically told her, you know what, if you try to take this to court, you're just going to waste your time. First of all, it's been too long. Second of all, you have no proof of anything, and without proof, there's no reason. So she didn't even bother reporting it. And in this household of three girls, two of the women in this house have been sexually abused at least more than once, and it's never been reported. So statistics are
Mm.
not
Yeah.
accurate at all. It just gives us a slight
Mm-hmm.
indication of the vastness of the
Mm-hmm.
problem.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's true with any kind of sexual assaults. There's so many that are unreported.
Mhm.
Ugh. Well, thank you so much. I'm glad your daughter's doing well. I'm glad you guys have healed from this and that you're taking something so horrific and you're going out and helping others. And I want to thank you for that.
Thank you for allowing me to, because that's my passion. That's my
I can
heart.
see it. I can see it. Well, thank you so much for being here and sharing this. And we're going to get the word out.